Increase in number, do not decrease, and pray for the city. Pray that it prospers and that it grows, because when the city prospers, you will prosper. As we mentioned last week, this was really difficult to hear for this group of people. They wanted to go back to Jerusalem. They wanted God to rescue them. God said that's not to be. And so what we see is that God using this group of people and their offspring to play a key role in the spread of Christianity 600 years later. It was all in God's plan, all in the will of God. So in the midst of this struggle, you see God was going to use them for the benefit of the world even when they couldn't see it. So today what I want to do is dive back into this story, the story of exile. And because in the story of exile, we learn a whole lot about God. In the story of exile, we learn a whole lot about his expectations for us. In the story of exile, we learn a whole lot about how we should respond to God. And all of this, all the stuff we see in the exile, is relevant to our move. It's relevant to what God is preparing us for in the future. So what I want you to do is, if you have a Bible, open up to Daniel chapter 1. If you have a smartphone, you can use the Bible app or whatever you like. Daniel chapter 1, we're teaching out of the NIV. Also, you can use the screen above. So in the book of Daniel, we're reading about a time period just after all these Jewish people have been exiled to Babylon. And what we read in this first chapter is the story, or the beginning of the story, of 4 men. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, you may not know this, but I named my daughter Azariah way before the Bible came out. And my daughter, Azariah, is a female. In the Bible, it's a male. I'm not sure why the Bible's so confused. Just a bunch of copycats, basically, is what's going on there. So, anyhow, the text tells us 4 things about these men: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It says that they were of royal blood. They were highly intelligent. They were handsome and in good physical condition. They were probably about 14 or 15 years old. They were young boys. Now, the king of Babylon, a guy named Nebuchadnezzar, name your kid that. Don't name your kid that. Imagine the nicknames of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebi, I don't know. What are you going to call him? Nebuchadnezzar. But this king wanted these young men to receive training and indoctrination so they could become part of the king's group of assistants and advisors. They were going to serve the king. Now, the plan was to feed them and train them and teach them so they could become leaders in Babylonian society. So Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did what was expected of them, and they even took on Babylonian names. Daniel became Belshazzar. Hananiah became Shadrach. Mishael became Meshach. Did I say that? Who's Shadrach? Hananiah. I'm glad you guys know the Bible so well. Can I start this again? Daniel became Belshazzar. Hananiah became Shadrach. Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Did I get it right that time? Better? Okay. So why would they change their names? No, I didn't. I'm going to know. Yeah, okay. It's in the Bible, people, okay? Why would they change their names? Why would they change their names? Well, for the Babylonians, it was very important when dealing with the people that they had conquered to assimilate them into their culture. They wanted to assimilate these people into their way of life and then eradicate the religion of the people. Assimilate and eradicate. So they would assimilate the people into their way of life and eradicate the religion. That's the best way to promote peace amongst the people that you've conquered, according to the Babylonians. So this is what they did with the names of those 4 men, because all 4 names had meanings that offered praise to their God, the Hebrew God, Yahweh. So Daniel meant God, or Yahweh, is my judge. Hananiah meant God is gracious. Mishael meant there's no one like God, there's no one like Yahweh. Azariah means Yahweh helps. Now, of course, the Babylonians weren't fans of these names because they didn't believe in the Hebrew God. They believed in their own gods. And so they renamed these men with names that honored their gods, Marduk and Nebo. Not to be confused with Nemo, that came later. Nemo was a fish, Nebo wasn't a fish. So these 4 Hebrew young men were born with names praising their God, but were assigned names praising the Babylonians' God. Assimilate and eradicate. These 4 young men did assimilate to a point. They took on these names that were an insult to their faith. They read the Babylonian books. They studied their government and their laws and their policies, and they made new friends and started to gain influence in this culture. They assimilated. But their faith was not eradicated. They maintained their faith and belief, and they even took a stand against some issues, some policies that threatened their traditions. But it says because of their faithfulness, these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and understanding and all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar, and the king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So they assimilated, but their faith was not eradicated. They adapted, but they were not changed. They changed their behavior, but this didn't impact their calling. They were called to become influencers without being overly influenced. Understand? Now, as I read this, 3 things stick out to me. First, they adapted in significant ways in order to make an influence on the world around them. Again, they changed their names. They read all the Babylonian books. They did the Babylonian education. They studied their laws. But they also maintained, number 2, they maintained their boundaries around their calling. So they assimilated while remaining unique. They assimilated into their culture, but they refused to change their own traditions. And because of this, they made an impression, number 3, around those around them. They made an impression amongst the king's court and all the people of Babylon, which gave attention back to God, right? People said they were the wisest in all Babylon. And so the glory they received reflected glory back to God. This is the perfect example of what we read in Jeremiah 29. Build houses, plant gardens, have families. Encourage your kids to have families. Increase in number. Do not decrease. Pray for the city. Pray that it prospers and grows, because when the city prospers, you will prosper. That's exactly what they were doing. Assimilating, becoming part of the life of the city, influencing the people that would eventually show those people who the true God was. That was the plan. That was the formula. They did a great job. Good job, guys. Good job. Good job. Good job. Oh, people are clapping. That's really cool. That's really cool. That's really cool. Story's over, right? Happy ending? No. Of course not. Turns out Nebuchadnezzar had a very high opinion of himself, so he built himself a very tall golden statue. The statue is about 90 feet tall, which doesn't seem too tall for us. We have roller coasters 3 times that height, but in the ancient world, that was probably one of the tallest buildings in existence. And so once this building was created, they had this big festival, and everyone got together. And then the people, or rather the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, and all that stuff, you must fall down and worship the image of the gold that the king made. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. That's a bit extra, Nebuchadnezzar. But notice that the announcement is for people of all nations and people of all languages. And this is specifically aimed at people like the young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There won't be any exceptions to this rule, not even for people that the king respects, and the king respected them a great deal. If you don't worship the statue, you will be executed into a fiery furnace, which doesn't sound great today because it's really hot. So the orchestra plays, and predictably, everyone falls down to worship, except those 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And of course, this doesn't go unnoticed. The king is made aware that these Hebrew men refuse to worship. They refuse to bow down to him, and he gets angry, and he calls them in front of them to stand at attention. It says he's furious with rage, and Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, guys, that you don't want to serve my God or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now I'm going to give you another chance. When you hear all the instruments playing and all the music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing fire. then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand. So he threatens them with death, and he also insults their God. But he also gives them another chance because he likes them. He thinks they're brilliant, and he doesn't want to kill them if he doesn't have to. So he gives them another chance because he can't be dishonored. He's a very powerful king. He's the ruler of the world in his mind. So what's it going to be? Worship or die? If they worship the statue, they've gone all the way in their assimilation. And God, their God, has been, according to everyone around, eradicated. To worship the statue means that they have abandoned their calling. Their calling was to be unique among the people so they can influence the people for God. If they worship the statue, they're no longer unique among the people. If they worship the statue, it means they are turning their back on the one who blessed them with influence and knowledge and wisdom. So what are they going to do? Are they going to worship the statue and abandon God and betray their calling? Or are they going to refuse to worship the statue and die? It's really an impossible situation, right? Here's what they say. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. In other words, King, you know what we believe. You know who our God is. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to have a conference. We don't have to take a vote. We don't have to pray about it. We don't have to ask our buddies. We're going to walk into the fire. It doesn't sound super exciting, but, verse 17, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able, he is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hands. Notice the words able. Nebuchadnezzar, we are not afraid of you because our God is able to rescue us if he wants to. And as much as all these people around are frightened of you, we aren't. Because our God is more powerful than you are. That takes a lot of boldness. It takes a lot of boldness, a lot of courage. But my favorite part is in verse 18. They say, but even if he does not rescue us, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Our God is able to do whatever he wants to. So he can rescue us if he wants to, but even if he chooses not to, he's still more powerful than you are, so we won't worship your gods. That's bold. That's conviction. What we see is them adapting, or rather following the same formula they did back in chapter 1. Why? Because they adapted in significant ways in order to make an influence on the world around them. They changed their names, they went to their schools, they made friends, they planted gardens and built houses. They studied their laws, studied their gods. But number 2, they maintained the boundaries around their calling, assimilating while remaining unique. There's some things they just weren't going to do. There's some things they just weren't going to take part in. Now, back in chapter 1, this made a favorable impression. People thought it was pretty cool. They liked them. They gained influence. They gained favor. God gave them favor. They had more friends. People thought they were pretty neat. So based on the results, back in chapter 1, that was the right choice to make. Now they're behaving in a similar way here in chapter 3. They have adapted in significant ways in order to make an influence on the world around them. They changed their name. They got their education. They built houses. They planted gardens. They made friends. They gained influence. But they maintained the boundaries around their calling, assimilating while remaining unique. They weren't going to bow down and worship some golden statue. But now, it looks like they're going to be executed. So does it make their obedience to God in chapter 3 unwise? Before it was great, because before they got popular. Now they're facing execution. Is it still wise? Does extreme consequences mean they shouldn't have stuck to their convictions? That's a tough question. Because it'd be very easy just to say, yeah, you know what? It's cool. I'm going to bow just one time, and then when no one's looking, I'm sorry, God, didn't mean it. Fooled them. But they know they were there for the purpose of showing the world the power of God. They were there to make an impression and reflect the glory of God. So they couldn't bow down. They couldn't submit. They couldn't bow down to anyone other than the true God. Now, I'm nearly 100% certain that none of us will ever be faced with the potential of being thrown in a furnace. I just don't think it's likely. I mean, it could happen, who knows? But I think we face similar choices all the time. We are faced daily with choices where God has clearly given us a task or a boundary that's really difficult. This happens all the time, every single day. Every single day. And we have the choice to step forward and follow the directive, even if we feel like we might lose something. Just as the men said, he may rescue us, he may not. But we are still compelled to be obedient. I think it's very rare for people to step forward in that situation and be obedient. I think it's rare. I think it's a rare person who has the courage to set their own desire aside and follow what God has asked them to do, because it's always very, 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 very difficult. One thing I want you to know is that becoming a believer in Christ is very easy. Walking along with Christ is very, very, very difficult. So I think most of us in this case, when we have to decide whether or not we're going to follow the directive or stay within the boundary, would choose to ignore, reject, or avoid following the directive. Avoid, reject, or avoid following the boundary because we don't like the consequence, or we don't like the purpose or agree with the purpose behind it. And as always, when I say something and I say us, I'm talking about me primarily, and I've done this 1,000 times, like every day. And here's what will happen. When I understand that God is asking me to do something, or challenging me to do something, or asking me not to do something, or to change my behavior, I'll say something like, I don't understand that, so it must not be for me. See some heads nodding, you get it? You get it? Or, God, that's asking too much, so I don't think you really actually mean that. God, I don't see how that can work, so you must not want that for me. God, I was good with you when you were asking me to do stuff that I could understand 100%, and I'm pretty sure it was going to pay off for me, right? Like I was going to make some friends or do some cool stuff. I can get it then. But now you're asking me to do something or not do something, and I don't know for sure how it's going to end up. So I don't know if I can really move forward and follow that directive. Not sure. Well, God, I like the parts about you that feel safe for me, like grace and mercy and love. Those are all things that feel safe. I can get on board with those. But forgiveness and holiness and dying to self and putting others before myself, those are far less comfortable. And so I'm not sure I can step forward into that. Now, I want you to understand that, again, this is an us thing, right? I'm not the preacher stepping up here and be like, yo, gotta change. I'm talking about me. And because you're like me, it means us. Cool? Got it? Thumbs up? Okay. Good. Thumbs up. Good. Good, good, good. But when we do this, God isn't God anymore. Just understand that. God isn't God. Who's God? Just put your finger out like this, and then do like a bicep thing like that. Oh, that's God right there. This is God. I become God. I become God because I'm asking him to bend to my will, and I'm asking him to serve me. And when I see God as mine, he follows my rules and must always approve of my choices and never ask me to do things that are difficult. And when I start to feel that conviction, I just turn up the worship music and put my hand in the air. God, you ain't talking to me. You're not talking to me, so I'm just going to keep singing. Shut him out because I'm God. And when I'm God, when I am God's, when I belong to him, when I follow his calling and prompting, I am compelled to change and grow and move forward, even when things don't make sense to me. And I know this because I've walked the balance 1,000 times. 1,000 times. There are some times in my life when I would say, if I was in that situation and I was given that challenge, are you gonna move forward into the fire, or are you gonna stay back? There's some times in my life where I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna compromise. I've been given a clear directive and a clear calling, and I'm not gonna move from it, so go ahead and throw me into the fire. Now, there are other times when I'd say, it's cool. Can you just, you the man. Like, I'm just gonna do what you ask. I'm not gonna walk into the fire. I'm gonna stay right here because I like it here. I know what's gonna happen here. It's much safer here. And I think you're with me. I think you know what I'm talking about. And we will face decision moments like this as we move into our new home. We will. I said last week, set your expectation on difficulty, okay? Do that. Promise me that. Promise me that. You're going to set your expectation on difficult. I think there's this sense among us that God has made a way for this to happen. That's true. I think we all agree on the potential impact. It's going to be great. We all understand there's huge potential for us to make a serious impact on multiple neighborhoods. That's true. We understand that moving is the key to us becoming a multi-ethnic church. That's 100% true. We understand that there's incredible potential for us to grow. We will. We can list 100, maybe 1,000 reasons why it's right and a miracle and necessary and fun and super exciting. Especially because I got air conditioning. But it's gonna be hard. Because when you build a church for everyone and you open up that space for everyone, you get more of everyone. That means people who make you uncomfortable. Everyone's got someone that makes you uncomfortable. Don't act like you don't, okay? People who look differently from you. People who act different than you. People who vote different than you. People who are crass and unrefined. People who think you are crass and unrefined. People who need a whole lot of work. You will feel less significant. You will feel less important. You will feel less connected. You're gonna stop being a consumer. You preach that, Pastor. Oh, I love this worship music. And then you're gonna turn into a provider. Let me give to you. Let me give something to you. Let me give something to you. You're gonna stop showing up to church asking to be fed and starting to say, how can I feed you? How can I feed you? How can I feed you? This is the transition we're all gonna have to go through. All of this will require all of us to work together like never before. It means that people who volunteer will have to volunteer more. And people who've never volunteered will have to come forward for the first time and say, yeah, it's my turn. I'm a part of this. This is my family. I don't know what I'm doing, but they're gonna tell me, and I'm gonna do it with gladness. And it means that, and we know this is gonna cost us, it just is. And so it means that people who have been generous with their resources consistently will have to continue to be generous and maybe start giving more. And it means that people who've never given resources will have to say, you know what, now is the time. I've prayed for this. I'm responding to God's generosity and grace, and so I'm gonna raise my hand now. And so even that conversation can make us feel uncomfortable. I'm gonna give you a hint. This is gonna be uncomfortable. It's gonna be harder than anything we've ever done, more time consuming, more costly, more involved than anything we have ever put our minds to together as a church. I promise you that. But the payoff will be all of us creating a legacy that lasts for generations. I'm not just saying that to say it, I mean it. A legacy that lasts for generations. As I said last week, 75 years from now, someone is gonna say, I learned the gospel on Walnut Street. My children know Jesus because of Walnut Street. That's gonna happen through us. If we agree to face that same dilemma as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and move forward into our calling. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And his attitude toward them began to change. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. And he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up the men and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. That man was so angry. He had to heat up the temperature 7 times. 7 times. How do you do that? I don't know, but that's what he did. And so being obedient to God resulted in the king changing his attitude toward them. And being obedient and moving forward in their calling resulted in their arrest. Doing what was right, yet uncertain, resulted in their seeming execution. And I think you can say, and just wrap your mind around this. I think you can say, God sent his own people into the fire. God, the same one that died on the cross and rose again, the same one who's come for the restoration of our souls, that same God sent his people into the fire. It says in verse 24, and something's happening here. Something's going on. Something's going on. It says in verse 24, that Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. He's seeing something inside the fire. And he rose up in haste. What's that? And he spoke to his counselors. And he said, did we not cast 3 men bound into the middle of the fire? We tied them up. We put those 3 people in the fire. And they said, yeah, that's what happened, king. And he said, see, right now I see 4 men loose, walking around in that fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th, listen, is like the Son of God. 3 men go in, but there's a 4th in the fire. And he has the form like the Son of God. You ever heard that before? I think I heard that before. How about right here? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him, the Son of God, the one who created all things, the one who's before all things, the one who holds all things together. Jesus Christ, Son of God, was standing with them in the fire. It was obedience to God that sent them into the fire. But it was the love of God and the Son of God that stood beside them in the fire, and you should be saying amen. It was obedience to God that sent them into the fire, but the love of God and the Son of God that stood beside them in the fire. So moving forward in obedience means we are never alone. It means that we are never abandoned. We may not know the outcome, but we know who's standing with us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword, or fire? No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loves us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, neither the present, nor the future, nor any powers, neither heights, nor depths, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ. So step forward in confidence. Step forward into impossible things. Follow the calling. Follow it even when the path is unclear, because he will be standing with you in the fire. And I want you to know, I want you to write this down. I want you to look at me. Put your phones away, look at me. God never promises that the fire will be safe. Fire is not safe. Fire consumes. God never promises us that we will always feel safe. The gospel is dangerous. The gospel is full of perils and losing self. So we won't always be safe. We will never be free from peril, but we will never be alone. The fire isn't safe. Jesus isn't safe, but he protects. He builds up, and he walks with us every moment, every step, through every trial. And I'm gonna tell you something. I'd rather stand with Jesus in the fire than sit next to him on my couch. Because it's in the fire where his power shows up. It's in the fire where I am totally dependent on him. It's in the fire where I have no doubt that he is in control and present and victorious. So if you want me in the fire, Jesus, that's where I'm gonna go. I love the king's response, or his reaction to all of this. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of who? Most High God. Come out here. And then there's this one. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because these men trusted him and defied my command, and they were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any other God except their own God. And there's that formula we talked about in chapter 1. They adapted and they assimilated, but always within the boundary of their calling. They knew they had to be different, and that would make them rely on God. But God stood with them in the fire. And because of their courage, God was magnified and praised. I don't ever want us to forget what a powerful and wonderful thing that is. Because when God is magnified through us, when God is praised because of what we do, we are reflecting the divine. Think about that. People look at us and see God, and they want more of God because of what we are doing. That means as humans, we are capturing the essence and power of God. And through us, people are compelled to worship. Think about that. People want to worship God because of what they see you doing. There's nothing on earth more powerful than that. Not influence, not money. There's nothing on earth more powerful than that. And we have the privilege of taking part in it. I don't know. Sometimes I think, God, why did you ask me to do this? I'm a fool. And each one of us could say that. Now I wonder, how many times has God given us an opportunity to step forward and radiate his love? And this time I'm talking about each like, think about you. I'm thinking about me, you think about you. How many times has he asked us to step forward to take on a challenge? How many times has he asked us to change something in your life that's hurting you? How many times has he asked you to trust him in a struggle, but you said no because you were afraid? You feel like maybe he's asking you to walk into a dangerous place, and I promise you that he is. He's asking you to walk right into the center of a fire, and it's not safe there. It's never safe inside of a fire. And you're never safe with Jesus because he asks us for life change. He asks us to do things that we don't want to do, like love people well and forgive and give ourselves over in love to other people. That's never safe. but he's always walking beside you. And it's in that fire that you grow the most. And it's in that fire where he's glorified the most. And it's in that fire where you learn to love him the most. I want to do something a little different as we close our service. I'm actually going to call the prayer team forward right now. So if you're on our prayer team, can you guys just make your way over to the right? And as we worship, if you need encouragement and courage to walk in that fire, I want you to go ask for prayer. If you need courage and encouragement to make a change, to confess, as we stand, come on, stand up. I want you to go seek prayer. And maybe you see that as a sign of weakness. You're right, it is. But it's in our weakness where the grace of God shows up the biggest. There's someone here that needs to ask for the courage to forgive. Someone here that needs to ask for the courage to step forward, to answer a calling. Go seek prayer. Even now. There's someone who's new here, they've never been to church for the first time, and you feel like maybe I should go, maybe I shouldn't. That prompting you feel is the Holy Spirit of God. Step forward. Go seek prayer. Maybe you know things just aren't quite right in your life. You need something more. You need something different. And maybe this Jesus is the way. Maybe you need a God who's unsafe, but always protecting. A God who loves you more than any parent or any relationship. A God who loves you with all his heart so that you can love the world with all your heart. Go seek prayer. If you're feeling afraid, seek prayer. If you're feeling confused, seek prayer. If you're feeling lonely, seek prayer. If you're feeling angry, seek prayer. If you're feeling hopeless, addicted, lost, seek prayer. Let's worship together.